Hey, what's happening, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Free to Grow CFO podcast, where we dive deep into conversations with brand founders and industry experts about scaling a D2C brand with a profit focused mindset. I'm your host, John Blair, founder of Free to Grow CFO. We're an outsourced finance firm that specializes in fractional CFO and bookkeeping services for growing D2C brands. All right, today's a big day. Why is today a big day? Because I've got my good friend, brother, as I call him all the time in text messages, co-founder, partner in crime, psychologist, therapist, whatever you want to call it, Jeff Lowenstein on the show with me today. Hoping this is the first of many of Jeff's appearances. Jeff is coming on today to help us talk about Amazon as a sales channel. Jeff's got a deep background in Amazon. I'll let him give his story in a few minutes. But Amazon is one of those channels that as a D2C brand is always top of mind if and when you should consider expanding into Amazon. And so I've got Jeff on board with us today. Jeff, thanks for taking time out of being a dad of a little baby and joining me on the show. What's happening, dude?
Thanks, John. Finally made it on and happy to be here. This will definitely be the first of many. And yeah, hopefully people enjoy listening to us jam about e-commerce topics. I mean, we're talking about all this stuff all the time on the phone, so hopefully it'll be helpful to bring it, to the audience here. And you forgot that we're in a business marriage, right? To add
Yep.
to your list of titles there. So John and I spent quite a lot of time together trying to build Free to Grow and serve clients in the best way possible. So um, it's been a good partnership, and I'm excited for the future for our business and for our relationship and friendship as well. So um,
Absolutely.
cool.
Absolutely,
Happy
man.
to get
Um,
started.
it's funny because what we're gonna basically gonna be doing right here is recording about an hour of like what my life and Jeff's life looks like on a typical day of us just riffing on different e-commerce and scaling topics. So really quick, why should you care about what we're talking about today? Because as I mentioned, if you're a D2C first brand, one of the easiest places, and I'll say tempting places, to consider sales channel expansion first is Amazon. We've been talking the last couple of weeks about retail. There's a place for retail expansion in your strategy depending on your goals, but the pressing go on that, turning that on, the operational challenges, the finance challenges, the shift in mindset, much different than considering an expansion into Amazon. So this is very important for you to understand the basics of Amazon and to understand how it's different and maybe the same as D2C and how you can use it strategically to enhance your growth and ultimately enhance the blended cross-channel, multi-channel profitability of the company. So before we get into chatting about Amazon, just like we always like to do, I'd love, Jeff, for you to run us through your story and then ultimately ending with how we met and how we joined forces.
For sure. For sure. And feel free to ask me to speed up, right? If I go on too long. But let's see. I've been in the e-commerce world since I worked at Etsy over in Brooklyn. I was there for a few years on the strategic finance team, and so we did anything that the CFO needed. That's where I learned about what is a marketplace, what is uh, e-com, and how is it different than retail? Who are these merchants and what do their businesses look like? And Etsy is a pretty special place. It's a unique player in this e-com world. It's kind of the anti-Amazon in a lot of ways, right? All the goods are unique, and uh, that's their heart and soul, right? And they really try to stay true to that. Whereas Amazon is built for efficiency and mass-produced products, right? So very interesting uh, contrast there. But anyways, that was a great learning experience. I helped rebuild that team. Uh, I was I was dealing with the marketing team. I was dealing with the international team very closely, uh, among other responsibilities. So learned quite a bit about e-commerce while I was doing that. And then I got an MBA after Etsy and worked on a Shopify app while I was doing the MBA. And I'm not a product person, is what I learned, but I learned a lot through that experience and got familiar with the whole Shopify app ecosystem. And that was a really eye-opening experience as well to learn a lot about all the tech solutions that are on the market and have empathy as well for our friends and partners who are building SaaS and so I know quite a bit from that experience. And then most recently, before joining John, I was the fifth employee at one of the e-commerce aggregators. This one was called Boosted Commerce. It's based in LA, but I was working remotely from New York, and I helped lead the M&A team. So I was responsible for finding brands, finding entrepreneurs that wanted to sell their brand, negotiating the deal, doing the due diligence, and then finally integrating and helping to operate the brand into the portfolio. And so we grew from zero to, nine figures in revenue extremely quickly in a way that you can't uh, scale organically, right? It was a real crash course in Amazon brands, direct to consumer brands. Really dissected the financials of those acquisitions uh, and other targets as well that we did, and so was able to take some of that experience with me and some of those playbooks that we built out with me as well. And so that's a story probably for another day, right? That could be a whole podcast on its own. Some of the war stories from being on the front lines of the whole aggregator craze. That's probably another podcast for us. But anyways, as I was leaving that job, just over a year ago, I was considering starting my own fractional CFO business. At that time, I had a few ideas. I even thought about acquiring one, and I was exploring a partnership with someone, and that person introduced me to John, and that was a very faithful introduction that set us down this path, right? So I'm happy to go more into that, how it all came together, John. But uh, anyways, that's all the background that led us to meeting.
Yeah, and I think it's important to share this for people to know. When I met Jeff through a mutual friend, I had been running Free to Grow for a little over a year, maybe about a year and a half, not quite. And it was very clear that there's a gap in the marketplace that we were meeting a very important need within. And so I was actually actively on the hunt for a partner, but have been an equity holder and on the executive team of several early stage startups, and kind of learn the do's and don'ts of who to partner with and who not to partner with, and what that checklist looks like of attributes that are needed. And so I had a very long list that I kind of quite frankly thought was probably unrealistic, and I'd probably end up partnerless because of that. But when I met Jeff, it was just very clear that he checked all those very important boxes, and I honestly I sat down with him and just said, "Hey man, how about we join forces instead of you starting your own firm? Because I think um, we could be quite the formidable team, and most importantly, we can scale and we can reach more of these e-commerce brand founders faster if we join forces." And that was really the heart behind it all, is like, how do I find another good human being who wants to build a business full of good human beings who want to try to help other good human beings in a very overwhelming situation, which is scaling an e-com brand. And so fast forward to a year later, and we've got, instead of the 9 or 10 clients I was serving at that time, we've got, getting close to 2 dozen, and growing. And it's just been really, really awesome getting to this point. One thing I do want to actually ask, just so you can clarify for the audience before we dive into talking about Amazon: how many Amazon brands do you estimate you've touched in either the M&A process or the integration process when you were at Boosted?
Well, it's a great question, and if you include brands that we negotiated with and we analyzed financials, but did not progress to the due diligence stage well into the hundreds, several hundred over a few years. And so you get a really good feel for how these businesses look on the financial side after reviewing hundreds, literally hundreds of P&Ls, uh, looking at financial trends and KPIs, looking at the balance sheet as well, right? So that was a real crash course. And through all that, right, through all those touch points, I knew from my background being in strategic finance roles and then also doing the, analysis and due diligence at Boosted Commerce, that the financial analysis that's needed for an e-commerce brand is challenging in some ways because of the working capital uh, requirements, because of the variability of margin when your marketing efficiency can be all over the map. And so I knew there was a need for this type of work, but I wasn't seeing it, right? We would see financial statements that uh, were sloppy, incorrect, I felt pain. I felt that pain internally for entrepreneurs who had worked extremely hard. That they had poured their blood, sweat, and tears into their business over many years, right? Invested their time, their family's capital, right? And they may or may not have been able to pull out any cash over that time period. And when they come to sell it, right, that's probably the most money they'll make is upon exit. And it was heartbreaking to see that actually what they thought they were uh, making in terms of profit was just incorrect in some cases. And so
Mhm.
that feeling always stuck with me, that there needed to be a little more rigor introduced into the space, and some of that same work that I was doing at Boosted could be offered as a service, and trying to help level up the financial discipline of ecom brands was the driving force behind why I wanted to originally start my own fractional CFO firm. And when I met John, he had the exact same, deep feeling that it's stressful, it's hard, and we can help the brand owners with making decisions, but also with feeling more confident about the financial situation of their business. So we were extremely aligned on that part, right? I would say, shockingly so.
Absolutely, absolutely. And look, um, I'll say one more thing, and then I'll shut up and we'll talk we'll talk Amazon strategy. But um, really, our mission is to help fight back against the stress and overwhelm of scaling an ecom brand, and it's because we believe every business owner deserves to experience the freedom and growth of being an entrepreneur. And it sounds cheesy, but that's where the name Free to Grow comes from. We believe that when we do our job well as bookkeepers and fractional CFOs, we help clients get a little bit closer to experience the freedom and growth that draws every entrepreneur into wanting to own their own business instead of work for someone else. Um, so with all that being said, let's chat Amazon strategy. So there's a lot to unpack here. I want to start with some basics, but some basics that, like, if you don't know the acronyms, if you haven't been in the Amazon space before, you may not know some of these things. You may not even know that there are different ways to sell on Amazon and fulfill on Amazon and things of that nature. So I want to start with bare bones basics. First one, Vendor Central versus Seller Central. Um, what's the difference between Amazon Vendor Central and Amazon Seller Central?
For sure. And they sound similar, right? Vendor Central, Seller Central. It's quite confusing. Uh, so there's a big difference. When you think about Amazon, people think of, I'm buying something from Amazon as a consumer. And that's right. You are logging into Amazon.com and ordering from Amazon. It shows up in an Amazon branded box, right? You return it to Amazon if you need to. However, there's multiple different ways that that product can be sold to you going on behind the scenes. And there's multiple ways that a brand can interact with Amazon's uh, platform. And the business model can be quite different based on what they choose to do. And so Vendor Central is just like traditional wholesale, you could think of it like what used to happen at big, or what happens today in big box stores, right? This was, the only way that brands made money in the past, right? It was you either sold into a big retailer, yeah, basically you would sell into a big retailer, and that's the same thing here, right? The brand sells at a discount to Amazon. Amazon owns the product and sells it on to you, and Amazon itself has to mark up the price to make their margin. If the product doesn't sell, that's Amazon's problem for the most part, right? And they can play with the price, or they can do other things to try to move the product, but they own the inventory, which is really key. So there's a negotiated price between Amazon and the brand. That's a wholesale price. And of course, Amazon's a big player, and they can negotiate very hard. And so they have quite a lot of power in the marketplace. So that can be challenging for lots of reasons for brands. But the upside, right, is that, if Amazon does a good job selling it, they can be a steady customer, and they'll buy from you in bulk. That's Vendor Central. Seller Central is completely different. Seller Central, and bear with me because it's confusing to think about if you haven't encountered a marketplace before. Seller Central is actually a third-party marketplace within Amazon where a brand can list their product, input their own listing images, input their own copy for the descriptions, all that stuff, and sell it to you as the consumer through Amazon's platform. The key difference is that the inventory is still owned by the brand. Amazon charges the brand a fee to hold that inventory in their warehouse, and then another fee to send it on to you, the consumer, within 24, 48 hours for it to participate in the Prime program. And so it's quite different because, well, you can think about it like this, right? Who actually owns the inventory at any point in time? And that's the key difference. But the business model is quite different as well, because you as the seller, you as the brand on Seller Central, you get to control the pricing, the copy, the images, how much you spend in ads, how much inventory you have in the warehouse, or how much you don't have in the warehouse. All those things are in your control. However, Amazon will charge you fees for services all along the way at every step of the chain, right? So it is quite different. It was several years ago that over 50% of goods on Amazon were sold through the third-party marketplace through Seller Central. In 2023, I just checked this before we got on, John, somewhere around 68% of goods sold on Amazon.com are third party. So
Interesting.
for those of you at home, you're thinking, what do you mean? I buy everything from Amazon, right? Well, actually, probably most of the stuff you're buying is sold through this third party marketplace through Seller Central.
So a couple things I want to riff on there. One, this is just this is hearsay. I heard back when Guardian Bikes, when we were selling on Amazon, I heard that Seller Central is actually more profitable for Amazon, because they don't have to take the inventory risk, and they are not, as not being not the seller, they have actually lower costs, and actually just charging the fees that they charge on Seller Central, they actually make a much higher margin. Don't know if that's true or not, but it did, at least from my experience and discussions I had with people in the earlier days of ecom, like 7-8 years ago. It used to be easier to get on Vendor Central, and they're making it a lot harder, I've heard, to be accepted into Vendor Central. And there's also this, again, I don't know if this is true or not, but like really Amazon is looking for a way to if your product crushes it, they want to just white label their own version of it and sell it if they can. And so, interesting story. This is actually really, really interesting. Guardian Bikes, we were selling on Amazon about 7, 8 years ago. Started on Vendor Central because Mark Cuban was an investor of ours, and he got us connected with the vice president of our product category. So we got a really sweet deal on Vendor Central, getting containers purchased direct from China. Um, so getting like $500,000 POs. There was a time when we had this weird kind of like lull in communication and didn't hear anything from them. Fast forward to like just a couple years ago, one of our investors was skiing out in Idaho, and he was sitting down at a bar talking to a guy who was like, "Oh, I know Guardian. I was the vendor manager at Amazon that handled their account. I won't say his name to protect him, but he told our investor, he said, "Hey, listen, for like a good 3 months, we were poring over your patents, trying to figure out if there was any way for us to introduce the same thing and get around the technology and not have to purchase from you guys anymore. But we could not figure it out. Your patents were like airtight, locked up. And so we kept purchasing from you guys." But so like that, I'm just pointing out that there is a risk. Amazon really does sometimes take over a product category after a brand crushes it on there. Now, I'm not saying that should scare you from Amazon. It's just to know that like you are selling on someone else's platform. You're not selling on your platform, right? So one of the drawbacks is you don't get to keep all the data. Amazon has all the data on the customer. They know who's buying. They also, they're always looking at ways to introduce new products themselves as a retailer. And so that's one thing to consider. Another thing is, and we can get into this more in a few, but like, or actually maybe we just drill into this here. On the Seller Central side, Jeff mentioned the fees for fulfillment and storage. That's unique to a fulfillment method called FBA, but there is also something called FBM. So I don't know, Jeff, maybe you want to like drill into, if you're selling on Seller Central, what are the different ways that you can fulfill product?
For sure. And I just want to respond to something that you said there. That's really interesting about Guardian and Amazon trying to find a way to replicate your product. It totally happens, and it totally is a problem that Amazon will launch a private label version of a successful product and steal market share. And there's even unfair advertising practices that they do, where I've seen certain placements that they'll put their own products in. I've seen listings from Amazon that don't comply with the terms of service, meaning like your first image has to be a plain photo of product and white background, and that's it. There can be nothing else in there, and they don't know it. I've seen Amazon products that violate that rule, right? So it's a problem that they don't always play by their own rules. However, I'm not convinced it's the problem that people think that it is. It gets a lot of mention in the press, and a lot of media outlets pick up on it because it's a very obvious, unfair example. But I think that the number of Amazon private label products that are actually that successful is very small. It was certainly less than like 2 or 3% of GMV. I remember reading in an article, and I don't know what the number is exactly today, but it was pretty small. And so, while it's something to watch out for, I would actually say it's not a great reason to not launch on Amazon. And I would
For
caution
sure.
people from being too frightened, like you mentioned, John. So it's an interesting
Well,
one, because I think it gets a lot more airtime than the dollar impact.
for sure. I mean, it's also like, come on, there's the classic, like, oh, the big guys like killing all the little guys in the marketplace with unfair practices. News outlets love to talk about that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
But like, the other thing is, it comes back to your strategy, right? Like, what is your strategy for building a brand? Like, the word brand, we don't say that we work with D2C product companies. Like, we work with brands. You have a brand name that is unique to what you sell. You may have a product category that there's competition from other brands, but when you're selling on Amazon, what's the difference between, I mean, there's a lot of differences, but generally speaking, what's the difference between an Amazon Basics, which like, yeah, I've got an Amazon Basics mouse right here, so I'm part of the problem.
Yeah.
and your branded product, right, is that you're building a brand that stands for something above and beyond just the product itself, right? And so like if you decide that there's a strategy within growing there's a brand growth strategy where Amazon is a good fit for one reason or another, most certainly don't let the whole like private label thing freak you out, because you're building a brand that hopefully stands for something that would stand up against a private label product should Amazon try to copy what you're doing anyways, right?
Well, I think you nailed it on the head, right? If you're scared to launch on Amazon because your product is going to show up alongside competing products in the category, maybe that's not an Amazon problem. Maybe that's your product problem, that you're not feeling confident that there's a compelling reason customers should choose your product and maybe pay a premium for that product as well, right? And it comes down to innovation, differentiation, right? And then of course marketing is important too. In some ways, Amazon is actually the most egalitarian platform. If you
Totally.
compare it to direct to consumer, right? If you happen to have a better hook in your Instagram ad, right, you might outcompete the next guy in your category, but that's not going to be very long lived if your product quality is not there and there's not a reason for people to keep coming back. On Amazon, people can see your reviews, ratings, photos, like real customer photos right there on the platform, right? And that feeds back into the algorithm, and so better ranked, better reviewed, and uh, you know, better received products should be ranking higher. And of course, people would argue, well, they say, well, it's pay to play, and that algorithm can be manipulated, and of course it can, and people do that, and that's good, good business as well, right? It's a good business practice, but it is actually, you know, a place where products can stand on their merits much more than, you know, uh, the vast like ocean of direct to
Yep.
consumer, where really you're competing for attention on who can design the catchiest ad to serve someone, right? And that's how you pull someone in. So, um, I would, yeah, I would say like people need to be confident in their actual product, that it can stand against the competition. And another just thing I also want to mention in terms of business model, right, is that depending on your strategy, it's not either or. I think it should be very much a both and I think they serve different purposes at different times in the life cycle of a brand. Amazon can be better for near-term cash flow and near-term sales, and I think direct to consumer can be better for building brand equity, building a relationship with the customer, building that LTV. Should happen on your website, where you can control the messaging and build a relationship with the customer. And so I think both are important, and I think people get sometimes lost in the like competing nature of the two. But when you get them both working synergistically, right, that's when you can really succeed.
Yeah, so actually we'll come back to the FBA versus FBM in a second, because I actually this segues nicely into something else I want to talk about, which is like it's the strategy of using Amazon. It's not just some sales channel that exists to like bring in more sales volume. There's a strategy to why you may want to leverage Amazon. And going back to this vendor central versus seller central, I'm going to tell a little story. So like at Guardian, we were D2C first when it came to our e-commerce business. Brian and Kyle, the other guys on the founding team, the original founders, they went on Shark Tank. We got an investment from Mark Cuban, and that was when the company could afford me to start full time. And Mark was like, "Hey, this needs to be on Amazon. Let me connect you with someone over there." So Mark connected us. We got lucky. This doesn't usually happen. We got connected with the VP of our product category. And at first, they wanted to do what are called domestic shipments, meaning they would just send us weekly shipments, small shipments that we'd send from our 3PL to various fulfillment centers for Amazon. The problem with that is that we had to double ship everything, ship it to our 3PL, and then ship it from our 3PL to all these distribution centers for Amazon. So the margin really sucked. So we pushed back, and I think we had some clout from Mark that really helped. And we said, you guys need to buy direct import, called or DI for short, direct from China. Containers at a time. So the risk for Amazon is they had to place big POs. We were getting PO 6-figure POs from them, but the advantage was they picked it up FOB China port, and so they used their shipping rates. And their shipping rates, Amazon has incredible shipping rates, right? And so that took a bunch of costs out of the supply chain. We both got to share in that margin improvement, right? But coming back to the strategy, we were very concerned about not having the data, the customer data, because that was a big part of being a D2C brand, was having a direct customer relationship, right? But at that time, getting 6-figure POs that we could invoice as soon as the goods left China, which is only like 3 days after we had to pay for them, we could go take that receivable, and because Amazon is a great paying customer, we could go factor that receivable and we could borrow 85% of that receivable and get cash today to keep scaling the business. So we decided to do Vendor Central for about a year because of, like Jeff was referring to, like we were able to get this quick, steady flow of big orders and orders that we could turn into cash quickly by financing those receivables. We did it for about a year. We ran into a lot of issues with like Amazon's algorithm changing the pricing and the pricing dropping super low relative to our site, and we just all these issues with the customer experience and pricing, and we finally decided, hey, we're going to go Seller Central, but strategically we couldn't do it until we could afford to, right? So we actually had to do a little bit of an equity raise and we went back to our investors. We said, hey, this equity raise is to help us transition from Vendor Central to Seller Central, and we need some capital because the cash cycle is different. We have to buy the inventory ahead of time. There's no receivables to factor. And so we moved to Seller Central, and all was good, but we had to raise capital to do so, right? And so the point I'm making, going back to Jeff's point, is that like there are strategic reasons of how to use Amazon and how, when to use it and to what extent. And we even eventually on Seller Central started taking some of our products off and only offering our lower price point entry level bikes on Amazon and not our full flagship product line and all of our accessories. And the strategy there was, hey, we're going to get new eyeballs on the Amazon platform, on the brand, that we wouldn't get through our D2C marketing efforts. And so we'll just have these products visible and available. And we'll execute some sales, but hopefully we got some brand loyalty of people coming back to the site to purchase later on. So I'm telling this story to say that like there are strategic reasons to consider expanding into Amazon. It's not just oh, let's just open up another sales channel. It's why, how does this fit into the strategy?
John, I'm curious, what kind of terms were you getting from Amazon when they would cut those POs? How long would they take to pay you?
So we had net 90 days with them, and they do a very typical thing that I feel like most retailers do, which is like they'll give you shorter payment terms for a percentage discount, right, on the invoice. And you can take longer terms for no percentage discount. And we actually ended up taking the longest terms they had available to us with no discount. And it's because if you annualize the discount, you don't realize this because it's usually floated as like 1 to 2%. But if in this case, the discount they floated was 2% for 30 days. 2% for 30 days is 24% annualized. I could factor that receivable for 15% annualized, right? So we actually took the longer payment terms with no discount and factored that receivable to accelerate the cash inflow, and it was a lower annualized cost of capital than giving a discount. So it was 90 days is what we landed on, but how we floated the cash flow to buy the inventory was we negotiated with our factory, because we had to pay everything before the goods left the facility, and we said, hey, for Amazon orders only, can you give us net 7 days? Because it takes about 3 to 5 for it to transfer title at the port and then invoice Amazon. And so what that allowed us to do is invoice them, factor the receivable, pay the factory, and that's how we're able to float that.
That all makes sense, John. Thanks for sharing. And certainly we could spend a whole hour on cash conversion cycle and how to calculate it, and uh, what you did there was obviously pretty impactful for the cash cycle of Guardian bikes. It's interesting, right? Because Vendor Central, yeah, the benefit is you get those big POs and quickly, and they can be great for cash flow, but you're also at the whim of buyer, right? And if
Yep.
those stop coming, all of a sudden your whole business can take a left turn really quickly. And so that trade-off it's really control is what you're talking about, right? Amazon can
Totally.
set the price low because they own the inventory if they want on a certain day, but that doesn't work for your website. However, if you're on Seller Central, you're selling it yourself. You're in control of all those aspects of the customer experience. So uh, and your business, right? So that's a key difference. I think you were asking about FBA versus FBM. Should we go back to
Yeah,
that?
what I wanted to ask you about there is like, okay, and I know you probably get this all the time too. Um, Brands ask me a lot, like when they're looking to expand from D2C into Amazon, like, should I do FBA or should I do FBM? And why does one matter over the other? Like, just explain to the audience the difference between the two and what the advantages and drawbacks are of using each of those fulfillment methods.
Sure. So specifically didn't mention this before, so it didn't get too confusing. But within the Seller Central version of the world, there's two main types of ways to sell on Amazon. One is called FBA, which is what I was mentioning before. FBA stands for Fulfillment by Amazon. You as a brand send your product into Amazon's fulfillment centers. They store it there. They charge you a fee for that. Many different types of fees, by the way, which again is a topic for another podcast. Um, and then once a product is purchased by a customer, they'll send it on and deliver it to that person's doorstep. But the key thing is with Prime, right? Because they have the inventory in their warehouse, they can plug it into their fulfillment network and deliver it with the Prime shipping promise of 48 hours in most cases, and they're trying to get it down under 24 hours. Uh, is their big push currently, and they're making quite a lot of progress. And so that's a huge advantage because I do it all the time, right? I think of something. It's changed the way that I shopped, the way that I think about acquiring products in my life is this program of Amazon Prime, right? I think of something, boom, within 10 seconds, I click a couple buttons, buy now. I don't have to think about it. It's on my doorstep the next day. So
One
that's
thing I want to say about that is that like to for you as a D2C brand to be able to ship to be able to get product to your customers within 24 to 48 hours, you have to have your product in many more warehouses than you think. I learned this at Guardian. You can't just have 2 to 3 fulfillment centers and reach everyone in the US in 24 to 48 hours. And so, although Amazon takes some of these fees from you, in my experience, they can get your product to customers in the prime like time frame much cheaper than you can in the early days. Later on down the line when you're at scale, depends on your product category, but when you reach some sort of critical mass or inflection point, you can begin to get product to customers in 2 days yourself because you have enough inventory to expand into all the fulfillment center nodes that are needed. But this is one advantage to going Seller Central in the early days is you can really benefit from their economies of scale and their fulfillment network and reach people faster. So I just something I wanted to note.
And that's it. I mean, when you think about the retail side of Amazon, not AWS, right? That's probably their biggest advantage and moat as a business is this amazing, amazing fulfillment network. And it's been quite controversial, but just in the last month, they started charging for that distribution of your product across the different
Mm.
fulfillment centers across the country. It used to be that you could just send it into the closest one to your warehouse or to your manufacturer, and they would do that placement on your behalf to get it closer to the different zones that they need to be in to deliver on the Prime promise. But anyway, so that's an amazing benefit of Amazon, and that's why they have so many eyeballs and customers, right? Is because of that Prime promise. Um, So anyways, that's one version of selling on Seller Central. That's called FBA. The other option is, well, there's two more options, but the other main option I'll mention is FBM, which is fulfilled by merchants. And that just means that you've listed your product in Amazon. You still control the pricing, the image, and the copy on the listing page. However, after the customer checks out, you as the merchant, you ship that on to the customer. And so, like John was saying, unless you're paying for, overnight or rush shipping, you're probably not going to get it to the customer, and certainly you're not going to get it to them within 2 days, just operationally, and certainly not at any reasonable cost to you on your own. And so, what you'll notice, right, when you buy from a website, you typically don't get it in that same 1 to 2 days.
Mm-hmm.
So it's leveraging the merchant shipping network and whatever operations they're using for the direct to consumer side. They're typically using to fulfill the Amazon order in this case as well. And FBM can be great, especially if you ship heavy products, for example, that may not make sense with FBA, or uh, made to order products can work for. There's certain categories that it makes sense for. It also makes sense when you're first starting out, when you're first getting launched on Amazon. A lot of people like to do this to just get the wheels turning, figuring out how does this whole Amazon thing work. And you may not have the operations set up yet to actually store product in the Amazon warehouse, and so it can be a good bridge to getting you started on Amazon. But the key drawback in FBM is that you probably will not have the Prime badge on your listing, and you probably will not be able to sell it through the Prime program. And that means that customers are going to see that, and they're just not going to buy your product at the same rate. And that shows up in your conversion rate is often much, much lower on an FBM listing than it is on an FBA listing. So hopefully that makes sense the way I explained it. I know it can be confusing. And one other thing I would add as well, not to confuse people further, is that FBM is often used as a backup for FBA as well.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you run out of stock, or um, maybe something expires or goes bad in the Amazon warehouse, and as a backup, you can fulfill from your own warehouse, right? So that's another way that people utilize the FBM program.
That you bring that actually reminds me of another important distinction between the two operationally, and using FBM as a backup. There's a processing time for product to become available in FBA, right? So one disadvantage is that you've got to ship the goods from your manufacturer, right? And maybe you ship them to your 3PL and then you ship them to FBA. That whole like lead time is long, right? Because normally D2C, it gets into your 3PL, they check it in, it's live on Shopify right away. You then have to ship it to Amazon, and it depends on the time of year. Peak seasons right before the holidays, you better get those shipments in early, because if you don't, they might not get checked in time for like Black Friday or like the holiday rush. They're a warehouse,
Yeah.
just like everyone else's warehouse. Like if your 3PL has delays during certain times of year, Amazon's likely going to have delays at FBA during that time of year. And it's even harder to deal with because at least at the 3PL, you can call up your account manager and say, yo, what's going on with that container? It's hard to get a hold of anyone at Amazon and track your shipments. You literally are sitting there checking Seller Central every day to see if your product got checked in. When you have those issues with that longer lead time to actually get stuff checked in and available on FBA, because it's got to go through the whole DC, like the whole distribution process and receiving process at Amazon, you can have FBM on where you're selling product and just drawing off your 3PL's inventory. Like Jeff said, you're going to probably have lower sell through and lower conversion because you won't have the Prime badge, but you can still have your listing live, right? And like the thing is, those listings work off momentum, and so you're better off. You're better off to go from FBA to FBM and have no Prime badge and keep some momentum than you are to go from FBA to the listing being inactive because you have no product in FBA. And so like it is definitely a good backup option. Every brand that I work with who sells on Amazon has to switch to FBM at some point because it is very hard to keep FBA stocked adequately, but not overstocked. There's an art to it. and it's very challenging. And so just something to point out there. I think the other thing I wanted to mention too about Seller Central that I thought of as you were talking is to just make sure you understand, because we learned this the hard way at Guardian. In Shopify, you're getting payouts every single day from payments, right? On Seller Central, you get them every 14 days. And so there is like actually a little bit of like kind of accounts receivable, so to speak, where like whatever you're selling on Amazon, that your merchant account balance is building up over 2 weeks, and then it gets swept over to your bank account. Whereas like there's kind of like this daily cash coming in when you have a Shopify store. And so that's something you've got to be ready for. And also, if you're a newer seller with no history, be ready for them to hold a reserve at the end of the statement period, where like you're like, hey, there's a 100 grand that I should be getting, but there's like whatever, a $25,000 reserve. They're reserving for returns and refunds and other things because you're a newer seller and they don't know what that return rate is going to look like. You can even be a seasoned seller and your return trends start going in a bad direction, and they'll hold a reserve. And it's so that there's enough cash in that account to cover refunds and other chargebacks. And so just know at the beginning when you're getting into that, getting into Amazon, you're going to get your cash every 2 weeks, and expect some reserve holds of some of your cash for at least the first little bit while Amazon gets to know you. And you got to prepare for that cash cycle difference, because it is different.
It is different. There's some there's a new feature where you can request a payout in some cases, which helps a bit to shorten that 2 week cycle. And the reserve is interesting. I was going to mention it, and you already did. The reserve is interesting. It got very complicated. Maybe not complicated, but contentious. Think about when you're doing an M&A deal. You're acquiring a
Oh yeah.
business, and the question is, there's this reserve amount that's sitting there week after week, month after month, that never gets paid out. It's just a balance that Amazon holds. Well, if you're buying that business, do you want to pay for something that you're never going to receive? And if you're selling that business, right, that is money that you earned, but it's just never going to come to you. You feel like it should come at some point, right? So you want the buyer to compensate you for that, because it is earned money. So it definitely got contentious at some points, to be honest, right? There's a lot of debates over it. Is that something that is it essentially should be treated as cash on the balance sheet, or should it be treated as a receivable or not, that reserve amount? So that was something that was always tricky in an acquisition that we had to deal with.
For sure. I've never thought about that because I've never been in that scenario, but that definitely, because you don't know for sure. I mean, more often than not, you end up getting the money, but you don't know for sure what's going to happen to that reserve. It's really kind of
Yeah.
just like, okay, let's see what happens here, you know?
Well, you get the money, but then the next payout, the reserve might be
Yeah,
higher, right? So
for sure.
it's kind of lingering there, and it fluctuates. So it's hard to predict, but yeah. Anyways, it's only 2 weeks, right? Which is still not as bad as the net 90 we were talking about earlier if you're on Vendor Central, right? So that's something to keep in mind.
Just another little like tactic that Amazon uses to generate their beautiful negative cash cycle is not just their payment terms with their vendors and with their Vendor Central, or their Vendor Central vendors, and then selling, direct to consumer, but they also have they get to hold on to Seller Central sellers money for 14 days. It's quite the crazy thing and then they're taking everyone's ad dollars on top of that. It's quite the business model they have over there. But look, what I want everyone to take away from this is that there are strategic ways to use Amazon. Okay. And it's all about like, we wanted to break down some of the basics of Vendor Central, Seller Central, tell some stories so that you can get a sense of like, what are some of the strategic levers that you could potentially pull. And this does all ladder up to, you need to be able to answer the question, like, why do I want to potentially expand to Amazon? It's not just a mindless turn it on, right? One other story I'll tell is like, I have a brand that is a client of ours that scaled up to very healthy 8 figures very, very fast on their D2C site, and their marketing efficiency ratio started coming down a little bit. They were still profitable, But they were spending heavily on Meta. And so they had, I mean, like they're spending millions of dollars a month on Meta, driving a lot of top of funnel awareness. And so they went ahead and just turned on Amazon FBM, didn't even go FBA, just FBM to see how that would enhance the overall blended MER of the business. And as soon as they turned it on, MER rose significantly. And so what that told us in part was, hey, there are people who are not converting on the Shopify side of the funnel who went to Amazon and bought, right? Because when we turned it off, MER dropped again. We didn't change anything else anywhere else, right? And so they used it as kind of like a just another point of sale, point of purchase, like place for someone to check out, right? And the thing was, there just are some people who prefer to buy on Amazon because they feel safe buying on Amazon, right? And then as you start building more and more reviews, if they're positive, there's more of this kind of like social proof, honestly, on Amazon where you're like, okay, like I've never heard of this brand before. I saw this Facebook ad and maybe it was a little bit cheesy, right? And like, does this thing really work? Does it not work? And you go to Amazon and you see this social proof there. Some people are willing to convert there again, even if it's not on Prime. And so like that's just another story of like how to consider using Amazon strategically as you're scaling your brand.
Totally. I think a lot of brands leave money on the table by not launching on Amazon earlier in their history. And if things are going well direct to consumer, fine, right? Don't overcomplicate things. But I really do think it should be part of the overall strategy from an early phase. And I think you're leaving a lot of sales and efficient sales on the table by not selling on Amazon. And when you say MER was higher for that brand you mentioned overall, that means that, on a weighted average basis, it was higher. So Amazon's MER, if you just compare that against the direct to consumer, clearly was much higher, right?
Yep. Yep.
So you're certainly capturing some demand that's already there. And I worked with a brand that I think they thought of themselves as direct to consumer when they started out, but they launched fairly early on Amazon in their history, and Amazon far surpasses their website in terms of sales now. And they're thankful that they started early with Amazon, because otherwise they would not nearly have had the same success as they have. So yeah, I think it should be part of an overall strategy. And if you're not thinking about it, I think you should.
Absolutely. Look, there's so much more we could talk about here. I mean, we're gonna have Jeff on more episodes regardless, but we might have to honestly have an Amazon strategy part 2, maybe even a part 3, because there's a bunch of stuff we couldn't even get to here. But this was all like super, super helpful, super relevant things that you need to be thinking about as a D2C brand operator. But before we land the plane here, always like to finish out with asking a little bit about our guest's personal life. So a lot has changed in your personal life in recent months with becoming a dad, but would just love to hear a little bit from you about something that you're loving right now about being a dad. And then on kind of like the more personal development or even business side, what's something you're reading or listening to or something that's just like really hitting you right now?
Yeah, for sure. It's been a big transition. My son is about 4 months old now, and John has 3 kids, so he's shown me the way uh, on a lot of things. But I mean, what I'm loving is he just started smiling back at us, so that's been amazing to see. And I'm trying to figure out all the little tricks to get him to smile, all the time, which is probably annoying him, but it's too bad. Too bad for him. And something I'm reading or listening to. I mean, not much time for reading these days, or even listening with him keeping up and everything. But I've I've enjoyed reading Outlive, which is Peter Attia's book on how to live a longer and healthier life, and extend the years in which you're able-bodied and feeling good in your own body. So that's been interesting. And um, even though I'm not always perfect at it. I do try to take care of my physical health as we go. So that's been important. And then you can find more info, by the way, on Free to Grow or myself, freetogrowcfo.com. My email is Jeff, Jeff, at freetogrowcfo.com. And my LinkedIn is alive and well, and my DMs are open there too. So feel free to message there if you're interested in chatting about anything.
Awesome, awesome. Well, what an awesome conversation today. It's been a long time coming getting Jeff on the show. This will be the first of many. Um, if you want more helpful tips on scaling a D2C brand, consider following me, John Blair, on LinkedIn. And like Jeff mentioned, you can find him on LinkedIn at Jeff Lowenstein. And look, if you're interested in learning more about how Free to Grow's e-commerce accountants and fractional CFOs can help scale your brand alongside healthy profit, cash flow, and confidence, like Jeff mentioned, check us out at freetogrowcfo.com. Hope today's conversation was helpful, proves to be fruitful for your business, and until next time, scale on.